Amazing event that was put on by Global Shapers in support by Apathy is Boring and by HFX Collective and by a few other people, specifically Grant down to our left here. So he actually organized this all for us, so we'd really like to first begin by just giving him a round of applause and thanking him for So to begin, as Grant mentioned, this is an event put on through Global Shapers primarily, and Global Shapers is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. And so what we are is we're a group of about 25 to 30 individuals around Halifax that are involved in projects and initiatives that are aimed to create social good. And so tonight what we're focusing on is voting and actually understanding what it is that our parties are here to do and how they're going to represent our issues as youth in Halifax. And so this is a part of a much larger project called Project Citizen that we've been running. And there's a lady at the table in the back there, Emily Miller. She is actually the project lead for that. And so between her and Grant and a couple others, as well as Alfred, we've really been pushing hard this year to kind of get citizens, especially youth, involved in everything that has to do with the political sphere and being a good citizen in Halifax as it pertains to anything politics-wise. So, as I was mentioning at my own table, tonight is set up to be kind of a low barrier entry into the political realm so that we can understand the issues that are important and really form questions that we can ask our political elected representatives or people that we are going to elect so that we can make sure that we are choosing the correct person to represent our interests, because we are the largest voting bloc this year as millennials, so our vote actually has a lot of power, and so we need to make sure that we're doing that responsibly. So thank you again for showing up tonight, and I hope you enjoy the evening, and I hope you get something out of each of the topics and get a chance to interact with the people around your table and the people that we will be hearing from later on in the debate. So with that, I'm going to pass it over.
Thank you. So my name is Alyssa Frampton. I work with the Democratic Engagement Exchange, which is an organization based out of Ryerson University. I live in Halifax though, and I'm the first of me, and so my job is to do community organization within Halifax and the Atlantic provinces. I'll go to Newfoundland tomorrow to do similar stuff there. But so what we do at the Exchange is we have resources and tools to send out to community organizations so that they can engage their population in voter engagement or in civic engagement in general. So we have a number of tools that can be used called like democracy, that we've called democracy talks, which people can host different conversations around what it means, what a good democracy means, or what it means to you to even belong in a democracy, or how you participate. But one of the tools that we use mostly during election time is called Vote Pop-Up. So that's kind of this is a condensed version of what that looks like outside, which you participated in. And so as a nonpartisan organization, we don't have candidates' names on those ballots that you saw, but what we do is we put issues, usually based on what the organization wants to see. So the issues on your ballot are issues that will be talked on at the debate tonight. And then what we'll do is we'll look at those issues again as you voted on them, so we can again further see what really mattered to everyone. But usually this tool is used for folks who have been, I guess, historically disengaged, the communities that have been historically disengaged from politicians. So a lot of them don't vote because why would you vote if you don't feel like you're represented and nobody's ever listened to you? So a lot of times that's where we go in to help provide those community organizations. We don't deliver programs. I usually don't run a vote pop-up, it's usually the organization, so it's a little different. And then they will also use them a lot of times with folks who've never voted before, so a lot of like new Canadians and populations that might have not experienced voting before, and just to break down those barriers of what that might look like. So yeah, I'm really excited to have been invited to come and to get to show you that. And then you'll also see that we have handbooks, which are at the front, and those are just to help you in guiding you looking into what the issues are for the election and being able to find non-biased information and understanding fake news and filters you can use to figure out political ads that are targeting you, stuff like that. So yeah, thank you so much.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So my name is Alfred Bergeson. want to start off by saying we are on Mi'kma'ki, the unceded land and territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I think we should keep that in the back of our minds while we're talking about some of these topics at these tables. For people that aren't here, I think we should be mindful about that at each of the topics. So as Grant said earlier, I'm on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, and with that we meet with him a few times a year, and it's a channel for us to give him advice. And I think, we're among very few number of countries in the world that have a youth council, and I think it's pretty special. I think it's pretty amazing that we have that, and I think it's also amazing that in a country like Canada we can host a space like this and have a discussion about democracy. I think it's something we're very privileged to have, and we should all use this time and cherish it. And yeah, that sort of was all my message, was that we're all here tonight, and we're very lucky to have this space. So hope everyone has fun tonight. That's me.
Amazing. So with that, really the point of this whole event is really to bring youth together and really get to discuss the issues that matter the most to us, and in a forum where we can actively engage with the candidates who will potentially represent us. So the whole point of this evening is to come together, discuss the issue that's most interesting to you, and then likewise you guys will actually be coming up with the question that we're going to be asking the candidate later in the evening. So we really wanted to provide a forum so that, because you feel like you feel like they're not engaged, you feel like their voices aren't heard in the political arena at the federal level, and this is really an opportunity for you guys to be able to directly engage with those potential leaders who will be representing you for this federal term. So I really hope you guys enjoy the evening. I really hope you guys get to know each other, get to learn a little bit more about our political system, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks. So yeah.
And feel free to grab food. It's to the left, or to your right, I guess. So we have food there. It's available. There is drinks also. Feel free to take some and enjoy some while you eat, or while you work, sorry.
A little bit of context as to the evening that happened tonight. Each and every youth that's been at one of these tables has had a different topic at each table, and they've been discussing, learning, and coming up with questions to ask you guys directly. Each of them have voted upon one question that they will get to ask for you, and we're going to give you 1 minute each to answer the question, and then at the end we'll give you 1 minute to rebut shared based upon, if anything, 1 minute to rebut the answer of any of the other candidates that you feel, and that's going to be a shared minute. So we're going to start with 1 minute introductions from each candidate to introduce themselves, and we can start that now. So let's start with Andy Fillmore, member of the Liberal Party, immediately on my right.
Good evening, everybody. How are you? Nice to see you. Great to be with you here at Global Shapers, with you again, in fact. My name is Andy Fillmore, and I'm the Liberal Party candidate for running for re-election here in Halifax. And I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting here on the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people, Mi'kma'ki. Look, in this election, there's a lot on the line. For youth, the stakes are even higher, and the outcomes of the October 21st election will have very long-lasting implications for your generation. But there's good news. For the first time ever, you are the largest voting bloc. You have incredible power in this election. Way to go. This means that the decisions that you make in the ballot box will determine the kind of economy that you grow your career in. They'll determine whether you have the support you need to buy your first home, how long it will take to pay off your student loans, and whether your family and you will grow old on a habitable planet. So at the end of the day, your vote will determine if Canada moves forward or if it goes backward. Liberals have an ambitious plan they can vote for.
Hi, my name is Bill Wilson. I'm with the Animal Protection Party of Canada. I also would like to acknowledge that we're here today on the unceded, unsurrendered lands of the Mi'kmaq people. So, not a lot of people know much about this party. Our mission is compassionate politics, to create government that will protect animals, empower people, and preserve the environment. The APPC was founded in 2006 although the party's focus initially was on the animals, it still is, but it also represents the interests of the general human population and the environment. Some examples from our platform include acting on the climate crisis, democratic reform, supporting Indigenous-led initiatives, advocating alongside equity-seeking groups, and removing animals from the property section of the criminal code, ultimately to end unnecessary animal exploitation. A big focus is the climate crisis. Other parties, in our opinion, are ignoring animal agriculture's huge impact on the environment, in particular the climate crisis. We recognize that government can do its part by ending animal agricultural subsidies, shifting those billions of dollars to support sustainable plant-based operations.
Hi everybody, my name is Joanne Roberts and I'm Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Canada, and standing in front of that's my problem, worked for 40 years in the media, so I understand why I shouldn't have been ahead of that speaker. I think that both of my colleagues are right. This is a hugely important election, probably the most important election in my lifetime, certainly the most important one in yours, because we will decide in this time frame whether we're going to do something seriously about the climate emergency we're facing. The Green Party of Canada has a plan, a workable, doable plan to transition us off fossil fuels and move us into the new economy. The new economy that will have the jobs that will be the jobs of the future. And I hope to work alongside Elizabeth May to make that happen and stand up for Halifax. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. How great it is to see you out. I'm so excited that you organized this and that we see so many youth using their voices and standing up and saying, you know, it's time to act, it's time to raise your voice. So I congratulate you on that. I'm Dr. Christine Saunier. The doctor's for having a PhD in Canadian politics. So I've been thinking about how we need to change systems and structures to make sure that we have more people who have meaningful input into decision making for a long time. For the last 10 years, I've been the director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. I know that our governments can be making different choices. I've written the alternative budgets that show exactly what those choices can be. I'm no longer willing to stand back and be patient and produce the evidence. That's why I'm doing this. I'm running because I know there is so much on the line. I am proud to be here as the NDP candidate because the NDP is very much about climate justice. How do we move forward in a way that leaves no one behind, no workers, no communities, that we transition in a just way?
And I'm sorry, that's also time.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, we do have a pretty diligent schedule, so we are going to be cutting quite short. Sorry. We're going to move to the question on the future of work from Alfred Bergeson's table. Please take it away.
Hi, so our question for you is how will you prepare youth and workers at risk of being made obsolete by technological innovation for the uncertain job market of the future?
Let's have Christine Saunier start with that one, please.
Thanks for the question. Obviously, as we think about what your future is looking like, the labor market is, and the precarity of the labor market and part-time work and everything that's happening in the labor market are huge concerns for youth. For the NDP, the priority is really how do we make sure that workers share in those gains, right? So as we have technological change, the impact that that technology has, whether it goes to promoting the profit of those who own the business or whether workers have a share in that depends on the power of those workers. So we want to strengthen and ensure that we do things like a $15 minimum wage so that our federal government is actually leading on these questions, that we strengthen labor standards so that there isn't an incentive for businesses to hire part-time or precarious workers without contract, that we level the playing field, that we ensure that the labor market is a place where you have a voice. So that's ensuring that it is easier to actually bargain collectively. Those are important parts of supporting you. Thank you.
Joanne, yes?
Thanks, Matt. It's an important question. I think that we have three prongs in the Green Party platform. First one is protecting workers whose incomes and works have been disrupted by either AI or the transition away from fossil fuels. What we're saying when it comes to AI is that we would institute a tax for large corporations that would be the equivalent of the income tax that would be paid by the person who they were letting go or replacing. So that fund becomes available for retraining and for investing in new jobs across the board. So asking the companies that are making the move to make sure that they're making it for the right reasons, not just to save money. We also would use this revenue to fund educational and transitional programs for laid-off workers who, and that would include supporting them through trade schools. We're also the party that's calling for free tuition and a guaranteed livable income.
Perfect. And to Bill, please.
Okay, so we support universal basic income. We want to provide also publicly funded post-secondary education through grad school for skills training. We look at the models in Europe like Denmark, where even people who don't live at home, they're getting extra money to live away from home. We're looking also to not just to transition away from fossil fuels, but also the animal agricultural system to sustainable plant-based agriculture. That should, those jobs are going to be, it's going to be better for workers' health. So there's a lot of PTSD in animal agriculture, very hard jobs. A lot of immigrants that come to this country end up working those jobs because, well, other people don't want to work them. And anyway, it would be a great thing to get away from.
Let's talk there.
Thank you.
Andy?
Thanks for the question, Albert Stable. That's a great one. Automation is going to have an impact here in Halifax. The Port of Halifax, for example, is a great example. We're going to see a pretty dramatic transformation in the way that we manage that sector of our economy in the coming years. But I want to pivot away from that and just talk about the fact that Canada is the #1 in the G20 for an innovative economy, for clean tech innovation. So this is really where the future is going to lie, I think, for entrepreneurs in Halifax, in particular in the ocean sector. We have an unprecedented competitive edge in growing in this growing sector. In fact, clean tech is expected to reach $2.5 trillion as a global industry by 2022. We are investing heavily in skills development for young Canadians and people looking to shift away from traditionally carbon-based economic jobs into the low-carbon economy future that we're all facing. And this is also going to include guaranteed access to family leave
And that's
if
time
you
to
don't
go.
qualify for EI.
So candidates, I'm going to allow you each 1 minute to, not each, but sorry, shared 1 minute to rebut anything that you feel another candidate said that you might disagree with, and we'll open the floor to that. Anyone wants to start that? No?
We're pretty honest.
No? All right. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question then, and that's going to be taxes and regulation from the table over there by Darren. And whoever asks the question, please feel free to introduce yourself to your representatives.
Hello, my name is Jeremy, and my question is, how do you plan to keep Canada competitive in terms of taxes, attracting investment, spurring jobs and growth, while also reducing greenhouse gas emissions and decreasing income inequality? Good luck.
Thank you. We've got a great plan. Hopefully luck won't be a part of it, but being smart about it will be a part of it. The first thing I'll say is that the Liberal government has already cut small business tax from 11% to 9%. But again, getting back to this transition to a low carbon economy, we have committed in our platform to cutting the tax rate in half for businesses that are producing zero emissions products. Renewable energy vehicles, like Sue Malloy, for example, here in Halifax is designing an electric lobster boat that will, her tax will be cut in half. Kat Adelaide is designing building-based wind turbines. So her small business tax will be cut in half for this kind of work that we're doing here. Overall, we're creating an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive, where they're made to feel as like they have the government supporting them, and that government policies and funding mechanisms actually respond to the real business world needs, particularly in involving technologies like the shift to the low carbon economy.
Perfect.
Okay, so we want to increase taxes on the wealthiest, provide low-cost government financing for smaller businesses and cooperatives. We want to phase out subsidies on economic activity that impedes sustainability, for example, oil and gas, so halt the oil sands development, no more pipelines. We also want to end animal agricultural subsidies, so we're talking billions of dollars, like $16 billion for animal agricultural subsidies that can be rerouted to other purposes. 1.75 billion given to the dairy industry this year. That's a protected industry in the name of, helping farmers that are affected by these new trade rules that are giving up a small portion of the international trade, which they can also take advantage of internationally. Not to say we don't care about those farmers. I think that money could be used to help them transition to a plant-based future.
Thank you.
We stay competitive in this country by staying on the leading edge. And that worries me right now as we continue to invest in what is a sunset industry, the industry of fossil fuels. So we would start with removing those subsidies and turning those subsidies back into green economy, green technology moving forward. There's a program going on at Dow right now where Chris White, some of you may know Chris, he is working on taking used batteries from electric vehicles and turning them into storage units for home use. So if you've got solar or wind powering your home, you need a place to store that energy. That's leading edge. I suspect if he comes up with a way to work those batteries all together, he'll have something that first of all can be patented. Patents in Canada have dropped by 22%. Where in the world, they're just down by 13. So we're lagging behind. We will put our investments in the new economy.
Perfect. And Christine?
Thanks. So when we think about the climate crisis, we're really interested in actually rooting out the root causes. And one of the main root causes of the climate crisis, how did we get to be where we're at, is income inequality. To address it, we really have to look at the gap between the rich and the rest of us. So the very top, our proposals are really around how do we redistribute wealth, and so that we're looking at things like a 1% wealth tax. How do we ensure that we have a progressive, fair taxation system that ensures that we can actually invest in people, including in post-secondary education, including in healthcare. Our competitive edge actually is our people, and our people are supported when we invest in the services they need to make them be as productive as possible. And that's education, that's addressing poverty, that's investing in our people. I mean, the one thing that I would say that I can thank Harper for is we know how destructive it is when we go down the road of just cutting and saying that, eventually we'll be competitive and that'll trickle down and it'll all be good. We know that's not true.
Well, we're going to open the floor for 1 minute rebuttal. Anyone can start it off. Feel free.
I'd like to point out that the Green Party platform also calls for a tax on the 1%, the 1% tax on the 1%. And we are offering free tuition for colleges, trades, and university at this point. So and we've costed it. We know how we can pay for that, and we'd be happy to show you.
If I could jump in, yeah. So people who know me will find that I'm extremely optimistic. I feel like we are going to hit all of our targets and we're going to keep global mean temperature rise below 1.5 degrees because we're doing so much of the work already and there's reason for great optimism. We're not lagging behind. We're leading the world in addressing climate change and people are taking notice of that. On batteries, anyone who's visited Jeff Dawn's lab at Dow knows that Halifax is literally leading the world on battery production. Another example, we've actually removed 9 out of 10 of the fuel subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies, just as we promised we would. The one remaining is the one that allows Indigenous communities to still have their generators run until we get them onto renewables.
For the Liberal candidate, why aren't you addressing animal agricultural subsidies? On one hand, you have the new evidence-based food guide that prioritizes plant-based proteins to reduce disease and impact on the environment. You're also investing $150 million on plant-based proteins, but on the other hand, you're giving billions of dollars to animal agriculture. And it's a destructive, it's climate breakdown, destruction of nature, species extinction. Why are we supporting something that we should be transitioning away from?
That's time there. Perfect. Thank you for your rebuttals, candidates. We're going to be moving on to the question on education coming from Colin, and again, whoever is asking the question, feel free to introduce yourself to your representative.
Unfortunately, it's going to be Colin asking the question. So this is a long one that sort of turned into a cost of living question. Many people in Halifax who consider themselves middle class are actually making less than the livable wage set for our city. There is a mismatch between the amount of debt and the jobs that people get, especially for young people. Instead of paying lip service to the dwindling middle class, how will you help make sure those near the livable wage can flourish?
Let's have Bill Wilson start with that one.
Okay, so fully funded education programs, post-secondary, skills training, also to free up money with expand our universal healthcare system, dental care, eye care, drugs, also more money into mental health, addictions, more preventative focus, basic universal income that'll help people transition to jobs easier. Our housing crisis, it should not be for profit. It should be at least 20, like social housing, cooperative housing. We should have more of that. 20% of the housing should be put to that instead of just more rental units. We should have some put aside to make sure that we're taking care of people. People have opportunity to do more when because we all have our times when we need that help. So.
Amazing. And now let's hear from Joanne Roberts of the Green Party.
Thanks, Colin. I told you about our plan for free tuition. I think that starts the process. But we are also the party that's calling for debt reduction for students. So we have costed out reducing and forgiving federal debt held by students over $10,000. So anyone who has federal debt over $10,000 would have their debt forgiven. That allows that class, and I have 4 children, 3 of them carrying debt. I know what this would mean to them. It would mean that maybe they could get an apartment without a roommate, right? Maybe they could actually get some furniture for the apartment and wouldn't have to work 2 jobs. So I know that will make a difference. We are also calling for a national pharmacare program. You will hear 3 of the major parties bringing that out tonight. I can't see any reason why working together in the House of Commons that it can't happen. And the National Pharmacare Program would certainly relieve some of the pressure on those living close to the poverty line. We're also in favor of a universal minimum income.
And let's hear from Andy Fillmore now.
Well, look, I think people in the room, maybe even to the point of becoming tired of the mantra, have heard the Liberal government talk about supporting the middle class and those working hard to join it. And that has guided not only our election platform before the 2015 election, but every decision that we've made since then. We have raised the taxes on the wealthiest 1% of Canadians. We've dropped the middle class tax rate. We are eliminating, if we form government again, the tax on the first $15,000 of your earnings. We've created the Canada Child Benefit, which here in Nova Scotia alone is bringing $100 million a year to families with young children. And we're supplementing that with the Canada Housing Benefit, up to $200 a month for those in the most acute housing need. The Canada Worker Benefit, directly to the question, for people who are working hard but can't close the gap on the bills that they pay. We have lowered the student interest loan rate. We've increased student grants from $2,000 to $4,200. We're forgiving, we're making it so you don't have to pay your student loan back until you're making $35,000 a year. We're creating parental benefits. Okay.
And on to Dr. Christine Soni of the NDP.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the question. I'll just have to say that I actually wrote the report on the living wage and did the calculations for Halifax. I know this work intimately, and I know that we need to work on both sides. We need to work on the income side, and we need to work on the cost side. And on the income side, as I said, we do need a $15 minimum wage here. We need to put pressure on wages. But we need to also look at the cost side. We want to invest in affordable housing, so make sure that we actually build affordable housing in the community, provide rental subsidies to those who can't afford, but also address things like the pharmacare program, ensuring that dental care is part of healthcare, wanting an affordable system of childcare. That's something that's important as we look forward to building families. We want to ensure that you have rights as people who want telecommunications. So we're looking to cap fees, have a telecom bill of rights so that you actually have a way to fight back the cell phone fees and the internet fees. I know that you're all feeling, as everyone is,
Sonia, but that is time.
Costs are too high. So thank you.
Again, we'll open the floor for anyone to rebut any of the other candidates.
Just wanted to drop in there that we have a platform commitment to reduce Canadian cell phone bills by 25%, and that ties nicely with the creation of the Ministry of Rural Economic Development, who the #1 charge in that department under the Minister, Bernadette Jordan, Nova Scotian Minister, is to supply high-speed internet access to every Canadian in the next 10 years.
Anyone else have anything to say? No? No? Okay. We'll be moving on to our next question again then. And we're going to open up the floor for the question on housing, and that's again from Emily Miller's table. And feel free to introduce yourself to your potential representatives.
Hello, I'm Jessie Hitchcock. I apologize in advance, this is a little long-winded, but it's a really important issue, so I'm sure you'll all grant us some time. So as I'm sure you know, Atlantic Canada has some of the lowest rental vacancy rates in the country. And at the same time, many landlords are charging exorbitant amounts for maximum profitability on those properties. At the same time, we have developers and homeowners who are renting out full homes and removing rental stock from the market to Airbnb and other short-term rentals. It's getting to the point where many people who even work full-time are struggling to find houses and houses that are affordable. So up until now, this has tended to fall with the municipal government, but in other countries, this is national policy. So we're looking to hear your ideas on what you think you could do at the federal level to ensure that people's right to profit doesn't supersede people's rights to have safe and affordable homes in our communities.
Let's open up that one to Dr. Christine Sonia.
So despite the fact that Canada actually ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that recognizing the right to adequate housing as a right in 1976, this is still not enshrined in law, we would do that. So the right to housing should be something enshrined in law. But more than that, as I said, look, we need to build more affordable housing, and we need to do that so that we ensure that some of that is outside of the actual for-profit market. Nonprofit, cooperative housing, social housing, working with people on the ground to understand what the demands are for that. Also providing some rental subsidies so that we're supporting people who have immediate need in the market. We do have proposals to support first-time home buyers as well. We think it's important that that dream of buying a home is actually something that you can look forward to. So we do have things in there that are around home ownership, around supporting you, doubling the home buyer's tax credit as an example. Also using the Canada Mortgage and Housing as a way to facilitate co-housing.
Sonia, but that is time. I would like to open the floor for Bill Wilson to answer that question now.
Okay, our position is we need to decommodify the housing market. Our priority should be on housing people, not making a profit off people. This can be achieved through social housing cooperatives, ensuring minimum 20% non-market housing in all new developments. It's not enough just to build more rentals. Rental hikes must also be regulated based on the cost of living and average wage increases. We also need a guaranteed basic income as well.
Go ahead, Andy.
Okay, thank you. So you may recall that the previous Conservative government spent a lot of time dismantling the federal role in the provision of housing. The thinking went along the lines that, look, housing is a provincial responsibility and the federal government doesn't belong in it. I couldn't disagree more strongly. You may know I'm a city planner and I've spent a large portion of my career trying to build better cities and more sustainable and inclusive communities. Zoning is a huge way we get there, but the federal government also has a role to play. So we're putting the federal government back into the provision of housing. The fact is, affordable, dignified, safe housing is the foundation on which people build their lives. It's how they stay healthy, get educated, start their families, get a job. So we put together Canada's first ever national housing strategy. It's a $55 billion plan that is going to end homelessness by 50%. It's going to reduce people, around 500,000 people from chronic housing need. And the centerpiece of this is the Canada Housing Benefit that will provide up to $200 a month for those in the most need.
Perfect timing. And we're going to be moving on to Joanne Roberts at the Green Party now.
Well, I appreciate that the Liberal government brought in a national housing strategy. Unfortunately, it's taking 15 years for it to roll out, and that's too long. So we have brought in some measures within our platform that would speed that up a bit. Like the New Democrats, we think it is time that housing became a right in this country, and that will change the dynamic. We would also bring in a Ministry of Housing, and we would redirect Canada Mortgage and Housing so that instead of being responsible for home ownership, which is their primary focus right now, they would be responsible for supporting the not-for-profit and affordable market. That's co-op housing, co-housing, looking at how do they incentivize rentals. We think it's time to put the tax incentives back for purpose-built rentals so that we have more rentals on the market. And there's two places that are making really good progress on fighting Airbnbs, which is causing a real problem in our market. And that's PEI, where they have a green official opposition. They're bringing in their white paper right now.
My apologies, Miss Roberts, but that's the end of your answer. We're now going to be opening up the stage for 1 minute of rebuttal. Anyone wants to lead that? Okay, I guess not. Then with that, we're going to be moving on to the question of immigration. That's going to be coming from Sylvia Hamilton's table. And please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Stacey Gomez. So the Safe Third Country Agreement between Canada and the United States assumes that asylum seekers will be protected under both countries, that they are both safe countries and have equal systems. Under this agreement, asylum seekers transiting from the US are unable to make an official claim at a Canada-US border port of entry, an official one, and they're only able to do so if they cross onto Canadian soil through unofficial ports of entry, which is often extremely dangerous. Knowing the US is no longer considered a safe country for many Canadians, what is your stance on this Canada-US Safe Third Country Agreement today? Thank you.
Let's have Joanne Roberts handle that one first, please.
Glad to. Thank you, Stacey, and I think Stacey's been almost in as many debates as we have. Thank you for the fight you have been putting up to make sure these issues get dealt with. The Green Party is calling for an end to the Safe Third Country Agreement, especially with the United States. We no longer feel that that is a country that respects the same basics that we do when it comes to immigration. I've lived in Manitoba. I've seen what happens when there are irregular crossings in the middle of winter. I've heard the voice, the young man who felt he had no choice but to leave the United States and lost 4 of his fingers and 5 of his toes. You tell me that someone risks that because they think they can be safe in that third country. It is time for this agreement to end. I also think when it comes to immigration, we have to create a new category for environmental refugees or environmental newcomers to our country, and that should also, we should take our fair share of the quota.
That's time, and let's have Andy Fillmore take the mic now, please.
Thank you. So it's important to understand that the Safe Third Country Agreement remains supported by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR. That's a body that also monitors it closely. In Canada, we also monitor it closely to make sure that its intentions are being met. Now, there are about 10% of asylum seekers in Canada that will have to in some way touch the Safe Third Country Agreement. And the reason that that agreement exists in the first place is that we all know that there's global migration in unprecedented quantities around the world right now. Migration and immigration systems are being absolutely stressed. Federal budgets of countries around the world are being stressed by the movement of people, whether it's from war or climate change or despotic regimes. When people start to apply under 2 countries at the same time, they're putting other people out of the queue, putting other asylum seekers whose lives may be in danger.
My apologies, Mr. Fillmore, but that is the end of your time. Now let's have Dr. Christine Saunier answer that question, please.
The NDP commits to an end to the Safe Third Party Agreement. It's time that we allow and actually strengthen our immigration system so that it is more fair and compassionate, and that agreement actually has to end. And so that is our commitment. You know, we've developed an immigration system that now focuses very narrowly on economic immigration, and we actually need to support people who are coming here, who are wanting to come here. I mean, what we're hearing in the US is atrocious, and so there's no question that we need to ensure that we are a safe haven for people and that we actually strengthen our ability in the system, so that we invest in the system and we invest so that we actually deal with the backlog that exists, that families are not heartbroken after 11 minutes of trying to get some of their family members here in reunification, that we actually focus on that as a compassionate and fair immigration system should be built. Thanks.
Time, perfect. And let's hear from Bill Wilson, please.
I'm in agreement with Christine and Joanne. Yeah, that's my position.
Short and to the point, I like it. Let's go 1 minute for anyone to rebuttal what any of the other candidates have said.
I just, thank you. I just wanted to add on what Christine said about wait times and making sure that people have a fair way to get into the country. I want to highlight that in the last 4 years, we've been able to cut wait times for spousal entries into the country from 26 months to 12 months. We've reduced the waiting time for parents and grandparents from 7 years to 24 months. This is allowing hundreds of thousands of family reunifications to happen in Canada, and we're continually committed to reducing those wait times and opening up our borders to those who need to get here.
I think we should also be reintroducing the legislation to establish a Civilian Complaints and Review Commission for the Canada Border Services Agency. We need to have a clearer sense of what is happening at our borders, and when there are complaints, that those who have a question have someone that will be independent to hear it.
And that's time we have for that. So we're going to be moving on to the next question of Indigenous reconciliation. And that's being handled by Alicia, and Rachel. And Rachel. And whoever's going to be asking the question, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, candidates. My name is Alicia Littlejohn, and I'm an Indigenous MSW student. Our question for you all will be, what are your local plans to work towards reconciliation? And specifically, how will you increase Indigenous youth engagement in the Halifax riding?
I'd like to have Bill Wilson please handle that question first.
I'd like to start, there's a Métis writer, artist, David Garneau. His position on reconciliation is not necessarily an adequate framework for us to move beyond our colonial history in this country against, well, Indigenous people. So his position is reconciliation implies that there was once a conciliatory relationship to return to, or a state of good standing, which is not the kind of relationship that Canada can argue it ever had with Indigenous people. This is why the APPC believes that we must look beyond isolating specific tasks set out by colonizing bodies and instead engage in Indigenous-led conciliation. Garneau explains that conciliation is moving towards something new together without a defined path already established by one party. It's not about creating a single process and then completing the task to achieve the outcome. It's about creativity, optimistic engagement, and honest communication as without a defined boundary or time limit. Also like to say that...
I'm sorry, Bill, but that is your time. And let's have Andy Fillmore answer that question next, please.
I got the first 2/3 of the question. What was the last phrase, the last part of it?
We have, how will you increase Indigenous youth engagement in
Right,
Halifax?
thank you so much. So over the last 2 years, I've been lucky and privileged to chair the first ever in Canada, summit between Indigenous, First Nations chiefs in Nova Scotia and the members of Parliament in Nova Scotia. And that's a model that hasn't existed in any other province or territory as yet. We've created a template for other provinces to follow. It's been a remarkable journey. The first summit took place in the center block of the House of Commons, and it was, you can imagine, it was a little bit awkward, the first sort of conversations. But now we've all gotten to a place where we have open lines of communication day or night, where we text each other whenever we want to, and we've become excellent friends. So that's real reconciliation right here in Nova Scotia. The Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center on Godgerson Street is in dire need of a new center. I've been working with Pamela Durocher, the director there, to land federal funding for that to happen. Part of that has been to enable us to build 4 units of housing for Indigenous women and their children who are fleeing domestic violence. Again, a tremendous act of
And
reconciliation.
there's time there, Mr. Fillmore. And now let's hear from Joanne Roberts of the Green Party, please.
I think when it comes to reconciliation, we need to know that there should be some very big moves and then some very different moves on the ground. Start with the big moves, and that is we have to legislate and accept the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We have to accept the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we have to accept the recommendations of the inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So those are the things we have to do immediately on the national level. On the local level, it's not right here in Halifax, but Elizabeth May has been standing beside the water protectors at Alton Gas. We have pledged our support to Chief Paul and the First Nation, Pictou Landing First Nation. I would agree with Andy. We need a new friendship center here in Halifax. Every time I've gone there for a gathering, I realize how important it is.
My apologies, Joanne, but that is time there. And let's hear from Dr. Christine Saunier now.
Thanks so much for the question. It's a very important question, and you know, my answer is kind of similar to Joanne in that I know that we need to do the work more nationally, right? So the party talks about the need for a different kind of relationship that is one that is in partnership with Indigenous communities. And so what that looks like on the ground is really hard work. I mean, it's the kind of work that we've been doing, whether that's at the Climate Jobs Roundtable, which is asking the question, you know, who's in the room, who's not in the room, how do we engage Indigenous youth and ensure that you actually are in the room, and that's going to the rooms where you are, as well as inviting you into the rooms that you need to be in. I'm very committed to making decisions that are evidence-based and involve people who are directly impacted by those decisions, always and every time. And I know that's critical. I'm still learning what all that means. I finally had the opportunity to do the blanket exercise. I know that means, you know, bringing that into my heart, saying again and again that this is cultural genocide. That's what's happened to the Indigenous people, and we have such
My
an
apologies,
obligation
Dr. Christine
to do
Saunier,
the
but that
hard
is
work.
the end of your
Thank you for the
time
question.
there. Now, again, we'll open the question for 1 minute of rebuttal for whatever candidate.
If I could, Alicia, I didn't get to the final part that I asked you to repeat. So Indigenous youth engagement. And I want to frame this in terms of the Irving Shipbuilding contract. So we have a $65 billion contract to build over 20 ships for the future of the Navy right here on the Halifax waterfront. As part of the community benefit agreement that came with that funding, we've created a program called Pathways to Shipbuilding. There's been a class for women shipbuilders, there's been a class for African Nova Scotian shipbuilders, and there's been a class, one so far, for Indigenous shipbuilders as well. I attended the graduation of that class from Nova Scotia Community College. I visited them on the job in the Irving shipyard. They are building the future of the Canadian Navy, and they feel such a tremendous pride from that.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for finding the loophole in my debate when I said 1 minute for rebuttal instead of 1 minute for addition. Now we're going to move on to the next question of environmental issues, and that is coming from Jane's table. Feel free to introduce yourself and to your potential representatives.
Good evening, candidates. I'd like to thank you all for coming out. My name is William Forsey, and our table wanted to ask, Halifax declared a climate emergency in January. In your opinion, what is the single most pressing climate issue facing Halifax, and what is your plan to address that?
Let's have Joanne Roberts of the Green Party handle that one, please, first.
It's hard to boil it down to one, William. Thanks for the question. I think the single biggest challenge facing Halifax is one that faces Nova Scotia. We have right now the inability to decarbonize our electricity because the east-west grid, the grid where clean energy could come from the rest of Canada and where we could send our clean energy back, is inadequate. It stops in New Brunswick, it's full. We cannot get Hydro-Quebec through there. We cannot get clean forms of energy. We're going to get off coal, which is our biggest problem in Nova Scotia. 65% of our energy comes from coal. we have to figure out a way to get that grid expanded. So I truly believe an east-west grid would be a top priority. I think it would be good for us. It would allow our entrepreneurs that are creating energy, clean energy here, to have a way to get it to other places, but it would allow us in the interim.
My apologies,
to,
Joanne Roberts, but that is...
I have 1 second left.
Oh, I'll give you 5. Go ahead. Sorry.
I've been sticking to my time. Anyway, there.
My apologies, Joanne, for that. Let's have Andy Fillmore answer this one now, please.
It ties back to my career as a city planner. Look, coastal erosion and coastal inundation are sort of the front and center manifestation of climate change that we see here in Halifax just about every single day. So we were all here probably during Dorian, and I went out and visited the communities that were impacted by Dorian the following day, that Sunday, that's beautiful sunny Sunday. And I saw the Herring Cove breakwater well, I didn't see it because it got completely washed away. I also didn't see the wharf in Ketch Harbor, and I didn't see the wharf in Brussels Cove, all washed away. Tremendous coastal inundation and erosion. So we have committed in our platform to launch the national low-cost flood insurance program that includes coastal inundation so that people can rebuild the damage and also fortify with climate resilient infrastructure or what they've lost. Our government is in a $180 billion infrastructure renewal plan. Because of my own private member's motion, M45, that's being delivered through an environmental lens so that we ensure that our climate...
My apologies, Andy, but that is time there. And we're going to move on to Dr. Christine Saunier to answer that now, please.
It is hard to choose the one thing, but given the example that you gave, and that is that the Halifax City Council declared a climate emergency and then the next day put up the price of the bus, right? I think perhaps the main issue is that we have no way to hold them to account. I mean, the NDP commitment around tackling the climate crisis is that we have an independent climate accountability office, that we have specific targets, that we actually have an independent audit, that we actually hold to those targets and make sure that we can hold our decision makers to account. There's lots I could say about the ways in which we, need to change how we move around the city and invest in transit, etc. But if we are not actually able to hold our government decision makers to account in any way, then how will we able to get to where we need to go, which is what the science is telling us we need to do. That evidence-based decision making and declaring a climate emergency means nothing
Again,
without
that is time, Christine. My apologies, Joanne, for rudely interrupting you apparently, but feel free to open the rebuttal session now.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies, I'm so sorry. Bill, please go ahead.
All right. The other parties won't talk about animal agriculture. We need to do everything we can to address the climate crisis. The UN says that it's one of the most significant contributors to climate change and global warming. It causes more emissions than all trains, planes, automobiles, all transportation combined. The IPCC supports plant-based. The largest analysis ever done on agriculture's impact on the environment, published last year in the Journal of Science, led by researchers at the University of Oxford. The lead researcher is quoted as saying, a vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth. Also, this is a huge finding. 75% of global farmland can be reduced and still feed the world. This is the combined size of Australia, US, China, and the European Union. Also, converting grass into meat is like converting coal into energy. It comes with an immense cost of emissions. So this is addressing the idea that grass-fed is some sort of climate solution. Another study called Grazing Confused in 2017, also at the University of Oxford, they went to settle that question whether holistic, regenerative, grass-fed could be a solution. They said no, it is not a solution.
And again, I will open up the floor for 1 minute of rebuttal.
And I will take you up on being able to go first. Let me start by saying we do have in our platform, Bill, and I'll show it to you, to establish climate change emission targets for all components of the food system, including nitrogen, fertilizer use, livestock production, and transportation. So we will address that question. I also want to call Andy on this, and he probably was expecting it from me. But when Dr. David Suzuki said he would endorse my candidacy, he said he was doing that because he wished we didn't need to have Greens in the House of Commons. But the day that the Liberal government decided to buy a pipeline after it said it was going to try and meet its climate targets was the day he knew that we needed Greens in the House of Commons to prevent that from happening. So I applaud the things you've done well, but you can't, talk out of both sides of your mouth.
We have a few seconds left, go ahead.
Well, I got, so the Conservatives want to revisit the Canada Food Guide, the evidence-based Canada Food Guide, basically because they're in bed with the dairy industry. Dairy industry has been removed as a food group, and they want to, put that back in probably. But surprisingly, the Green Party, on page 38 of their platform, quoted, "We remain concerned that it discourages consumption of Canadian milk products, a relatively inexpensive source of calcium and protein, inexpensive because it's subsidized by billions. A lot of people are lactose intolerant. Most people who can drink dairy are people from ancestors from Europe, basically white people.
My apologies, Bill Wilson.
So there's nothing green about dairy or meat. Thank you.
With that, why not? We have a little bit extra time. Go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Well, we can't let the pipeline hang there in the air like that. So there are a few things. First of all, for every dollar that this government will spend on the pipeline, we're spending $15 on climate action. It's important also to recognize that the carbon footprint that's associated with that pipeline is about 14 megatons of emissions. Alberta signing on to the Pan-Canadian Climate Action Plan got us a national price on carbon. We wouldn't have it without Alberta, and that's giving us a 60 megaton advantage on our reduction target. So you can do the math. We're ahead 46 megatons because of that pipeline. Also, because of the pipeline, Alberta agreed to cap the oil sands production. That is where 40% of GHGs in Canada originate from. And the funds that we earn from running that pipeline are going to pay directly for the transition to a low carbon economy. That pipeline has put us ahead, not behind. It's a crucial part of our transition.
And then with that, we're going to move on to the next question. I appreciate having a little bit of extra time for each candidate to get a little bit extra in. And we're going to move on to the question on healthcare. That's going to come from Reg's table. And again, feel free to introduce yourself and address your potential representatives.
Hello, I'm Laura, and we have a question that kind of goes into more your considerations when you're thinking about healthcare. And we're wondering, what do you think are the challenges to a preventative and equitable healthcare model?
Let's have Andy Fillmore open with that one.
So planners talk a lot about the social determinants of health, right? So the best thing we can do for people's health is to prevent them from getting sick in the first place. So the way we live, the kind of communities that we design and build are fundamental to that. Do I have the opportunity to ride my bike to my job? Does my daughter can she walk to her school? Or do we all need to get in cars and emit emissions and get unhealthy from a sedentary lifestyle, from long commutes? Those are just some examples. Others are, can we grow our food locally and eat healthfully? So fundamentally, the social determinants of health, the way we build our communities, the role of the federal government and all orders of government in creating the places where we spend and grow our lives are fundamentally important. We can talk all day long about how much money it's going to cost to make sick people well, but let's just not let them get sick in the first place and focus on creating great, healthy, walkable, sustainable neighborhoods.
Let's open up the floor for Bill Wilson to answer that one now, please.
Okay, so of course we want to expand the universal health care system to include dental care, eye care, drugs. What I'm going to focus on though is preventing health issues. Major killers in Canada are cancers, heart disease, strokes, diabetes. Most are preventable. The promotion of a whole foods, plant-based diet, encouraging exercise and reducing environmental pollutants would be important to do. Also, increased costs on known health risks, such as animal-based foods and smoking. Processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen, according to the World Health Organization. Liberals subsidize bacon plants. That contradicts their own food guide. Doesn't make a lot of sense, tied to heart disease. It's the type of food you find in poor neighborhoods too, right? Access to healthy food is tough because there's a lot of processed meats and other processed food. So Dietitians of Canada, Healthy Vegan Diet has health benefits including lower heart rates of obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancer. It can meet all your nutritional needs at any stage of life.
Bill Wilson, but that is all the time we have left. Now let's move on to Joanne Roberts of the Green, please.
Thanks, Laura. It's a very good question, and I think there are a number of challenges that do prevent provinces right now from dealing equitably and preventatively with healthcare. And one of the challenges is we have not had a new federal provincial health accord in decades. And it is time to have a new health Accord. And that health accord sets the formula for the funding that comes from the federal government to the provinces. And that funding right now is pretty much based on a per capita basis. So that means it's not equitable, because if you have older citizens living in your province, or you have a spread out province like we do, you need to change that funding to reflect that. You also need to put in that funding incentives for having a healthy population that's dealing with obesity, for putting a tax on sugary drinks, for example, so it's preventative.
My apologies.
I'm done.
Okay, sorry. Moving on to Dr. Christine Saunier to answer that question.
Thanks. This is something I've spent my career advocating around, which is the social determinants of health and how do we get our politicians to act. And what I said as a researcher, as an advocate, is it's been a very much a lack of political will. It's been the fact that when we talk about the social determinants of health, and that's about income, and it's about housing, and it's about race, and it's about gender, and that impact on our health, it's much harder to show in a 4-year cycle what the impact is. We need, federal leadership that really addresses those social determinants, which we've talked about today. We need to look at the fact that our health system is built in the 1950s and is physician and hospital centered, and we need to, support community health centers like the one in our community just down the road that does amazing work that actually begins to get at preventative health care, that gets at all of the people that need to be around the table, including our social workers. Right, so we do need a new health accord that has vision attached to it, that has more funding, because we've been underinvesting in our healthcare system.
That is time,
and
Christine
that will be
Saunier.
important.
Again, we will open the floor for 1 minute of rebuttal from all the candidates. Please go ahead.
I feel like I'm picking on some people here. The Conservative candidate who's here, I have questions for him too. I want to say that the NDP candidate, though, I've great things, but nothing in the platform says anything about animal agriculture. I will ask the Liberal candidate again, why does the Liberal Party subsidize processed meats, or the animal agriculture in general, especially in light of the food guide that promotes plant-based foods, when we could be eliminating those subsidies, shifting them to healthy plant-based agriculture, and helping those farmers switch to plant-based operations?
Well, Bill, I'm afraid I've already chosen what I was going to rebut to, and it's not that. So I'm going to go back to what Joanne said about the qualifier, and Joanne, I'm glad you included it about the healthcare transfers, about being pretty much based on per capita, and so not anymore. So that's the point of this, is that in 2018 we made the largest increase to the Nova Scotia health transfer in history. We tipped it over $1 billion for the first time, and we added $300 million to that, specifically for mental health care and for home care. So this is the beginning of addressing individual needs, the demographic requirements of our province.
We are running out of time there. But again, we will open the floor right now. We're through all of our questions from each and every table. I would like to open up the floor for 2 minutes from each candidate to follow up on anything that you feel is pertinent and really address as to why these voters at the tables here should be voting for you. Let's start with Bill Wilson, please.
Sure. So we're addressing, we're expanding our moral circle to also, we're a social justice platform that includes justice for animals as well, and taking part of our environment. It's not about putting animals above people. It's about the fact that if we take care of everybody as much as is possible and practicable, then that's better for everybody. It's being consistent to what we already believe in our hearts, and that's not to cause unnecessary harm when we can. Certain words sometimes people have bad associations with, but practically speaking, I'm really trying to focus on the messages to end animal agricultural subsidies, transfer those billions of dollars to support healthy plant-based operations, which would reduce land use by incredible amounts, 75% according to the study from last year, and to help farmers who are stuck in these systems like supply management and the subsidies that keep the status quo. Eventually they're going to have to change anyway. Let's start moving and changing now while it's easier, because down the road it's going to be a lot harder. The ones who get out first are going to be a lot better off. I hate to use this analogy, but the canary in the coal mine, canary died, that's when you knew you got out of the coal mine. That's happening now. The signal's there. People got to start making the move.
And we will now open it up for Joanne Roberts to give her 2 minutes.
I'm going to ask you tonight to think about the future you want. Can you imagine a future where you have, where we've made significant restitution for the centuries of injustices with Indigenous people? Can you imagine a future where homes and businesses are powered by 100% renewable energy? Can you imagine a future where our vehicles are electric? You have lots of places to plug in your scooters, your car shares, and your bikes. Where tuition is free, where debt is reduced, where housing is a right. Can you imagine a future where we have solid, secure jobs in the new green economy right here in Nova Scotia, where we have the opportunity for a guaranteed livable income, where newcomers are welcomed and supported and seen as valuable to our community, where we have universal pharmacare, where we measure our success by well-being, not just by GDP? This is not a wish list. This can be a reality. It is possible because it is supported by science and by following the example of countries that are already going in that direction. It is time for Canada to lead, to be the innovators. But we can't get there with business as usual. We can't get there by doing what we've always done, by voting for the same old parties over and over again. We get there by imagining better. And we get there by moving forward together. And we get there by working together across party lines. I believe that if we end up with a minority government, and we have Greens and New Democrats working in a new parliament, we will see a better Canada. I hope that is the future you imagine for yourself, and it will be the future you vote for.
Perfect, right on time. And let's move to Christine Saunier to address the potential voters in the room, please.
Thank you. I know that many of you probably feel like you're doing the right thing and yet you're running in place. It is totally unacceptable that you go to post-secondary education and you come out saddled with huge student debt, and now you're facing also an uncertainty when it comes to the labor market with the kind of not quality jobs that are there. And now you're faced with perhaps not having a future given the destructive ways that we have moved forward as a country, as a world, in fact. The New Democratic Party will be there to stand up for you, for the public good. We need to hold our corporations to account. They're responsible for low wages, for the cuts to services, for the climate crisis. They have a stranglehold in Canada. We need to take our democracy back. And that includes not just a change in our electoral system, which needs to happen, a change in our workplaces so that workers have more power, but changes in our communities too. We commit to ensuring that this transition that needs to happen is a just one, and that we build a more inclusive economy as we move forward. Tackle stagnating wages, tackle race and gender inequity, skyrocketing housing costs we have to absolutely address. You're crushing student debt by eliminating student interest right away, and those ballooning prescription drug costs, which means that people are making very difficult choices. It is important that we have a government that makes evidence-based decisions and does that with your direct input. We will fight to ensure that your government works for the many and not just the few at the top. I hope that you will consider supporting me to be your voice in Ottawa. Thank you very much.
Amazing, and now let's move on to our final 2-minute introduction. Please leave the stage for Andy Fillmore.
Thank you, Global Shapers, for your work tonight and for those thoughtful questions. Now, before you cast your ballot on October 21st, I hope that you'll take to consider the whole range of progressive policies that the Liberal Party is proposing to move Canada forward. I know, though, for many people, climate change is the ballot box question. So here's what I'd like you to know tonight. The Liberal Party has a climate plan that you can vote for, and I'm not shy about our record on the environment. In fact, I'm running on that record as the government who has done more than any other in Canadian history to fight climate change. A national carbon price, phasing out coal, making electric vehicles more affordable, investing in renewables, doubling our protected nature. We have a plan that you can vote for. It's a credible plan, it's an ambitious plan, and it's the one that expert environmentalists and economists agree is the most feasible plan, perhaps the only feasible plan being presented by any party. In our first 3 years, we put in place measures that get us 75% of the way to our 2030 targets, and that includes accounting for the emissions from the TMX pipeline expansion, on which there is a hard cap. And we're not slowing down now. We're putting in place measures to achieve the remaining 25% reductions early, and in our platform, we released a new target, a net zero Canada by 2050, and we're the only party with legislated, aggressive 5-year milestones to make sure that we get there. We can and we will meet these targets, and we'll meet them early, and then we'll set even newer and more ambitious lower targets. On October 21st, you can cast your vote, and you may cast it with your heart. But the hard electoral reality is that when we wake up on October 22nd, we'll have either a conservative government or a liberal government that takes us backwards, or a liberal government that moves Canada forward. So I'm asking you to vote with your heart, yes, of course, but also with your head. Because with the weighty presence of strategic voting in this election, the choice between going backward or forward is yours to make. Thank you very much.
Amazing, and I'd love to give a big round of applause to our candidates. These people will be potentially representing it, but I'd just like to say a quick few words, please. You all showed because you all wanted to engage in our democracy. You all came because you wanted to be the ones asking the question to these candidates. Now it's up to us as youth to show that not only are we engaged and not only do we want to ask these questions, but we want to show that we want to be represented, so it's up to you at the polls. So I'd like to say, please give a round of applause to our candidates, and I'll see you all October 21st. Thank you.
If you want to know the results of your ballot, it was a resounding win for climate. So you cared about climate the most. I'm trying to pull up the actual data that I have here for you with numbers. But 15% of you casted your ballot for climate, which worked out to be 32% of this room. The next one was future of work and Indigenous reconciliation, which both came in at 13%. Then immigration came in at 10%, and the rest were all others. And some of the others were wealth gap, green careers, Jeffrey Epstein, and regulating taxes from provincial to federal to even out the tax burden across the country. And 6 of you spoiled your ballots. So there are your results. That's like over 40 votes. So thank you so much for participating, and have a great night.
And just a quick other word, the Halifax Global Shapers will be hosting an election party at the Propeller Brewery. So after you guys cast your ballots, we'll see you there. And we have a survey for all of you to fill out from Alfred Bergeson, if you could do that with Apathy's Boring. Thanks so much for attending, guys. Good seeing all of you.
Well, actually, yeah.